When most people hear the word voodoo, they think of dolls and dark magic. But the truth is, it's far older, deeper, and far more spiritual. Well, today we're going to be diving into one of the most misunderstood and misrepresented spiritual traditions in the world, voodoo. Often sensationalized in pop culture, its true roots lie in profound wisdom, cultural resilience, and sacred rituals. Joining me today is Lilith Dorsey. She's a renowned author, filmmaker, and priestess who has dedicated her life to preserving and sharing the authentic traditions of African and Afro-Caribbean spirituality. Lilith is initiated in multiple spiritual paths, including Haitian Voodoo, New Orleans Voodoo, and Santeria, and it brings over 3 decades of scholarly and experiential insight to the conversation. We explore the true history of voodoo and how it evolved with African diaspora, and Lilith's personal journey as a voodoo priestess, teacher, and cultural bridge between academia and sacred practice. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, the one and only Lilith Dorsey. Hello, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on, Tony. I'm so excited.
I'm excited too because, Halloween is just a week away, and, the spirits they're getting their costumes ready too. And, and I've always wanted to speak with somebody. It's been a long time since I've had somebody on that was really knowledgeable about voodoo. I mean, we've talked to Patty and some other people, but, your specifics of voodoo, and that's what you practice on a daily basis. I'm excited to have you here. And so I just want to dive right in where, voodoo is often described as a living religion rather than a set of superstitions. And I really want to know how you define true voodoo practice and its spiritual and cultural context.
It's hard, even if we look at the linguistic history of it, right? Like some people say it means spirit or deity or that which is unable to be known, which I think is a beautiful way of framing it. So anything that we don't really fully know and understand, that's voodoo, right? So I think that's, but if we look at the practices, it's centered around ancestral worship. It's centered around living in harmony with nature. And that's not the picture you're going to get from mainstream media, right? So I think that it's very skewed, most people's ideas of what the tradition is.
Yes. And somebody that's been working in podcasting for 16 years in the heart of Hollywood. We all know how Hollywood or television or movies can really depict voodoo and any paranormal genre topics. So I even remember, you're probably way too young for this, but James Bond, Roger Moore, when the voodoo priestess, she used tarot cards, and then they were in New Orleans where they showed a side of voodoo that was very scary. And so I don't know if you remember that or not.
I do. Live and Let Die, right?
Yes.
1971. We had Jane Seymour as Solitaire, the priestess. And surprisingly enough, there's a couple of tiny things that movie gets right. Jeffrey Halder, who a lot of people remember as the dark Baron Samedi figure in the film, and then later on the 7-Up commercials, right?
Right.
What I grew up with. He was actually an initiated priest from Trinidad.
Was he really?
In addition to being a choreographer. So all of those ritual scenes, he choreographed them, I guess, to the best of his ability, right? Like we know what it's like working with, large corporations, but tried to make it as accurate as possible. So, I do remember that film. I do. It was probably my first actual pictures of New Orleans that I saw. I had an aunt that was constantly channeling Marie Laveau. She kind of had one foot in this world and one foot in the other. which helped her sometimes and didn't help her other times. But she was constantly, singing the Marie Laveau song when I was growing up and all of that. So I had a very early exposure, albeit a weird one, to New Orleans voodoo and Marie Laveau, the most famous queen of voodoo ever. So yeah, I think it was sort of, they planted the seeds when I was young, and I just had such a fascination for it. And I live here now. So New Orleans.
When did you really stick your toe into the water of wanting to, it's one thing of kind of, watching it on television or reading a book about it, but really starting to dedicating not necessarily your life at the time, but dedicating to just getting to know what voodoo was about at a deeper level?
Yeah, I think that there were always things that my family did growing up that I didn't realize were voodoo things. But I suppose I started dedicating my life to it, maybe, or a more serious study of it when I was an undergrad in college. I started out doing my undergrad in film at NYU, and then I left to go get my undergrad in anthropology. And I had an anthropology teacher who said there's no such thing as magic in the United States. This guy was a complete idiot. He's probably dead now. I was like, that's not true. I grew up in New York with Magical Child and Enchantments and all those like legendary witch stores that I used to frequent. So I knew he was already wrong. And my daughters were young at the time. And I thought, I don't want them growing up with this idea of voodoo, that it's evil or bad or anything like that. So I just decided that there's nothing else out there, written by a practitioner, written by somebody, a person of color at that point. There wasn't anything written even by a woman even at that point, So I think that I sort of wanted to just be another voice out there. And I started studying very early on after that. I met my priestess Miriam, who runs the Voodoo Spiritual Temple here in New Orleans. And I've been with her ever since. And I think I've lost count, but I think it's probably about 33 years that I've been going there and helping her out and everything like that. And I have my own spiritual house now, but really the impetus to begin with was just to provide an alternate narrative for all those little Black and brown kids out there, that their ancestors were not bad, their ancestors were not evil, their ancestors were not hateful, and that this isn't something that should be feared. It's something that should be embraced.
No, I honestly totally agree with you, just because from the work I've done over almost 17 years working in the genre, that I've got to learn about so many different cultures and religions and spirituality and people like you that give us the insight, not just learning it from television or from our religious leaders in the Christianity or wherever you grew up in. I even one time interviewed a guy he was a priest of, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of the church. Anyway, he changed my mind. Not saying I would ever follow that religion, but it really showed me that I had nothing to fear about that religion. So I hope people listen to this and really have come in with an open mind. And maybe some people that want to learn more about this. And speaking of that, you've studied and been initiated into several African, and I apologize my pronunciations for most of these things. Is it diaspora? Diaspora,
yeah.
Yeah, diaspora religions, and that's from Haitian to Santeria and New Orleans voodoo. You've been initiated and studied all of these, and how did you come to walk this multiple path journey? and how do you hold integrity in each of these paths?
It's not easy. It's funny. I spent last summer in Benin, in Africa, birthplace of voodoo, right?
Wow.
And they all practice several different things. Several of them go to a Christian church in the morning. They go to the
Really?
Voodoo temple in the afternoon. And then for divination, they use Ifa, which is sort of the parent tradition of La Regla Lukumi, which most people call Santeria. So I think that it's not, if we look outside the U.S., it's not as uncommon, but people hear that and they think, oh, she just wanted to run around and connect initiations. And
Right.
that's not what I did. As with a lot of people, I was living in New York when I first started studying the religion, and I was coming down here to New Orleans 4 or 5 times a year and things like that. And I'd had a tragedy occur, and it turned out in order to get justice, I got a reading from a friend of mine, and she said, okay, you can get justice in this situation, but what you have to do is initiate after you get justice. So, I was like, okay, that's fine. At that point, I would have done anything and everything to get justice. And for me, it seemed like a fair trade-off, right? And so La Regla Lukumi or Santo, that primarily my practice with that is for divination. I'm not an initiated Isese or Babalawo, obviously, because I'm, have female parts. But I still do. I have a good friend who's a Babalawo who I consult for, spiritual divinations occasionally. I do divination for myself, but that's how that kind of works out, unless there's a really big thing that shows up in the reading that I need to go back to Lukumi and practice that. Although I have my warriors, for those of you who are also in the tradition. So I do my weekly offerings and my prayers, and I keep, clean in that way, according to the religion. New Orleans Voodoo, I practice all the time. That's the type of house that I have here. I've had my own spiritual house for about probably 15 years now. Got about 20 godchildren. We call them godchildren instead of students because it's kind of like a parent-child relationship, which is really beautiful, I think. Some people have parents that don't welcome this alternative spirituality or welcome what their spiritual gifts may be. So it's nice to be able to be that person for them and to consult them in that way. So that's beautiful. And then Haitian Vodou, I was living in New England and I was teaching, tarot and intro to astrology and stuff at the Unitarian Universalist Church, because Unitarians are wonderful, welcoming other traditions in. And they said to me, we've got a new minister and she's a Haitian Mambo. And she went to Harvard Divinity. And I met her. Her name was Bonnie Devlin. She's no longer with us. But I just loved her and she loved me. And she decided to initiate me. I was the first person she initiated. And again, because of the tragedy that I was going through, she thought it would be helpful to me. So I started with her. And I'd still contact her even though she's not alive anymore. Right. But it was very special to me. She also had multiple initiations. And I think that's because she was a drummer. So lots of times what you see is musicians and dancers traveling through the traditions, because there is some similarity with the rhythms and the dances and things like that in the different systems.
Actually, I was going to ask you about that, about how does ritual and ceremony in voodoo differ from Western forms of worship, and what purposes do dance and drumming and possessions serve within a ceremony?
It's all very regimented, right? Like, I think people think it's all out there and wild, abandoned and everything like that. But there's very specific rhythms, there's specific songs, and people really train for their whole lives to learn these rhythms and these songs and these dances and to do them properly for ceremony, because that's part of the thing we have to do in order to get it right and be dedicated. And then you mentioned possession. If everything goes right during a ceremony, then the spirits can come down. To use Zora Neale Hurston's word, they mount people like a horse, right? And they use them to sort of just bless the community. I've had people in rituals that I was doing, whenever anybody acts out in my ritual, I'll tell you a story. Whenever anybody acts out in my ritual, I give them a job, because I just, instead of just yelling at them or shushing them or something like that, I'm like, okay, spirit has put this person in my space, right? And one time this person was talking when I was doing the opening ceremony part and the invocations and things. And I was like, come here, so So I gave him a machete to dance with and use to bless the space. And he was an older gentleman, and he spent the next 2 hours leaping around with this machete, dancing with it, doing all these things. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, I was talking at the beginning not to be disrespectful, but I have really bad back pain. And I was wondering if I'd be able to stay for the whole ceremony. And as soon as he had the machete and as soon as he was in that ritual space, there was no pain, and he could just leap around and do whatever he needed to in that space. So there's lots of stories like that where, whatever the person needs in that moment is presented to them. I think there's a little bit of a sort of misunderstanding about possession and speaking in tongues and things like that. What I've seen most often is sometimes, one time I had a possession experience where at the time I did not speak French. So I'm speaking this like Quebecois French to somebody whose ancestors were actually Quebecois, and I'm yelling at him in French, and and I was like, I had no idea what I was saying, and I was like, did you understand any of that? He's like, yeah, I got it. He was being very bold and sort of like tricksterish, and his grandfather kept yelling at him, "You're not Napoleon, sit down." So it was hysterical. But yeah, it's those things that okay, what would my grandfather have said when he was around? He would have told me to sit down and behave myself. So it was that kind of a thing. But that's usually what a possession experience is, and they will do things that are extreme, right? At the time I didn't speak French, and here's me speaking perfect Quebecois French, or this person is, almost bent over and can't move, and then they're leaping through the air. I've seen little tiny 95-pound women pick up 300-pound men and throw them across the room.
Wow.
So, there's this display that they have so that they show everybody who's there that the spirit is in attendance. And that's one of the hallmarks of how you can tell if it's fake or not, right? Like, is this person just doing something they always do, or are they just, we call it, I don't know how good your Spanish is, but we call it being possessed by Santa Baracha, which is the word for drunk. So sometimes people use it as an excuse to just get attention, and that's not valid. But people gonna people.
Well, that's people are people, and like in some dances, like Dances with the Stars, the movement's very regiment. We kind of work together. We know what position, but then you have so you think you can dance is very free flowing. Is there dances that are like that in voodoo that where one you can just kind of let your body do what they do, and then there's some dances where I'm going to teach you the movement, almost like a Tai Chi type of a movement?
Pretty much with everything in the religion, and dance is certainly no exception, that you have to learn the moves first. And then once you know exactly what it is you're doing, you're allowed a little teeny bit of leeway to take it where you want to go. But I just taught a dance class last week in New York City, and people are like, what? I can't just do what I want. And I'm like, no, this is very important that we have these very simple, repetitive movements that then frees up our spirit to go somewhere else. So it's kind of like almost, I explained it to the dancers like isolations, right? Like, so if you're concentrating on this arm goes up and down and this arm goes left and right, then your mind is going to be concentrated on that. But your real thinking mind is going to go off somewhere else once you get your body into the habit of doing it. And that sort of freeing moment where your mind goes somewhere else is what we're going for.
That's pretty amazing. I always, when I was younger, I loved dancing, but my spouse actually teaches, dance, well, more Zumba, but still most people, dance is such a, I think, vital part of just being a human. The spirit just, can kind of be free. And I think that's probably through voodoo. It's, even though it's precise on movement, but the freedom of just the spirit, and probably opens up possession even easier. But possession, how do you go into it knowing that spirit is a good spirit, and how do you leave the ring or the space and know that spirit has gone back to where it came from, so it doesn't come home? How do you protect yourself?
Well, first you protect yourself by setting the space. It's very,
Oh, okay.
and in a lot of ways I think that's really more important than the actual ritual. People show up, oh, okay, well, we're going to hurry up and get everything done before people show up, and my thought is always, no, whoever shows up should see what goes into setting the space, because you're setting a protected space the same way at night you check your windows, you check your doors, like it's that kind of a thing. We're not setting a circle, but we'll lay down cornmeal with the special symbols. They're called Vedes for the Loa. And these symbols are kind of like calling cards for them. We'll bless the space with incense and candles and herbs. And it's all very complicated sacred geometry that's happening here, right? Like, so you're setting up this space. And I had a Babalawo in the tradition. He's renowned. And even from back in the day when I was a kid, Baba John Mason, he started the Yoruba Theological Seminary in New York in the, I want to say, late 70s, early 80s. And he said, voodoo is like a fractal, which means it can be as small or as large as we need it to be. So what you're doing is setting this space where it could just be you and me doing a ritual, or it could be, I've done rituals of 2,000-3,000 people, and that's the size of the space where the ritual is. So you can scale it up or down, and it's still intact. The other thing you do is very often you'll see voodoo people or La Regla La Kumi Santo people wearing all white with a head covering. That's also designed to make sure nothing unnecessary goes in or out of your head or gets in there. And then the priest or the priestess, the Santero, Santera, Mambo, Hungan, they're guiding the ritual to make sure there's none of that unwanted energy. And when you start out, it's kind of a little, because for years I would go to things and I wasn't initiated. You kind of have to stay separate from the ceremony. It doesn't matter to them that you had a dream about Oshun or, I've been praying at home and I made an altar. They don't care. Until you have that initiation, whatever you're hearing is not, it's not going to be accepted by the community, and it's even questionable for you whether or not you should listen to it, right? Like, so part of the process of the first initiations is to make sure what you're hearing and what's contacting you is what needs to hear you and what needs to contact you, as opposed to, old uncle whatever who died last week who really can't find his teeth or some crap like that. So that's not important right now, old uncle whatever, you're dead, you don't need your teeth. But so it's really that kind of a thing. And all of those things are very, complicated. I think we also don't have this idea of dismissing them. I remember going to my early, Wiccan circles and things like that. Okay, now go home. Like I've had parties where I told people to go home, and it always seems a little like, pushy. Usually I'll just be like, well, I'm going to go to bed. You can just, you stay out here and drink, clean up, lock the door when you leave. So it's kind of more that way, like, okay, I'm going to end the ceremony, but if there's something else you need to do in order to protect me, please do that and take care of it and go when you feel like it's the time to go.
I love that. I love that. Well, I think when people think of voodoo, I feel New Orleans is like the Vegas of voodooism. Why is New Orleans so known for that? And it seems like all around the country, they could be in other cities, but first things people think of is voodoo, New Orleans or Nolans or whatever you want to say. Why is that?
I think New Orleans is the sort of hub of voodoo for a lot of different reasons, right? Like it's on the Mississippi, which is such a powerful body of water. True, and as I mentioned, the religion's deeply connected to all the elements, and water probably is at the top of the list because I wrote a book about water. The planet's mostly water, your body's mostly water. So water is everywhere, whether you want to admit it or not. You've got water in your body, you need water to live, right? So all of that is really there. So I think because we're on the water and also because we're underwater. I was talking to a good friend of mine who said they had come to New Orleans and they didn't contact me because they were too, taken aback by the energy here. And I was like, I think that's because it's underwater. We're below sea level, or my house isn't, but most of New Orleans is, because I live next to the canal and they dug out the canal and put the dirt over here. So technically I'm above sea level, but most of it is below sea level. So you've got a whole different energy. And then historically, you look at the Haitian Revolution, there was an insane influx of people. I'm not good with numbers, but I want to say probably 80 to 100,000 people, somewhere around there, that migrated to the city after the Haitian Revolution in the late 1700s. So you've got the population of New Orleans almost doubling at that time.
Right.
And that's still the population of New Orleans now. So, you're looking at 250, 300,000 permanent residents of the city. So even if they weren't practicing voodoo before then, they certainly were practicing voodoo after that, because there was such a huge influx of Haitian people. Then you've got queens like Marie Laveau. I think if Marie Laveau wasn't who she was, that we would not be as popular as we are. Her grave is the second most visited in the United States after Elvis. And I think that's fascinating, because I've been to Graceland and they've got like a plane and like Elvis is, there's all this other stuff going on at Graceland. Right. So I see why people go to Graceland. It's like Disneyland, but for Elvis fans. So New Orleans, going to see Marie Laveau's grave, and now you have to pay to get in because somebody defaced it. So now there's only one tour company that's allowed to go, and you have to go with the recognized tour company, which is sad because, back in the day when I started traveling down here, they still locked the cemetery, but you could go and do whatever you wanted, which was a lot nicer than it is now. But she was the first person to hold public ceremony in the United States, like, witchy magical ceremony. She had amazing clients. It said she did readings for Queen Victoria, which I think is, like, oh, wow, look at that, right? Like, here's this, voodoo priestess in New Orleans. And basically she was just a hairdresser, but she was so good at what she did and so good at being the public face of voodoo that it's carried on all these years, and everybody here in New Orleans has a Marie Laveau story. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I had a friend that had a show that like she just asked everybody their Marie Laveau story. I have a few, right? Like I have one where I had gone with a friend of mine who's a drummer, and we were going to do a ritual for her. I was going to dance for her, and they were going to drum, and so we're doing this, and then the tour guide comes by and goes, "This isn't a real voodoo ritual. First of all, it's during the day." And I almost fell over laughing. I was like, oh, you can't practice voodoo during the day now. Okay, fine, right? Like, it's just the things they make these people take tests, but the things they say are so inane and ridiculous. I don't know how they get away with it.
That's funny. That's funny. Yeah, I like I said, I've honestly been to New Orleans when I was a kid. I really want to come back and just explore. And I would love to meet with someone like you, or for sure meet with you and just get to know a little bit more about the voodoo practice and see firsthand of what you go through and what you do. So one of these days I might give you a call and say I'm in town or coming to town. So
yeah, definitely. I'm always doing classes and stuff for people who come and visit, and we have a little voodoo B&B here that's open for friends and guests and things like that. So definitely.
Okay, that's on my list. But you mentioned you written a book, but you've written many books. We have Water Magic, Goddess. I think
goddesses and voodoo queens.
And then Orisha. What is now when you go in to start writing these books? What inspires you to choose the subjects, and what are the big questions that you want to answer answer in your book that people are asking?
I think that, Orisha's Goddesses and Voodoo Queens, that was sort of my gimme book from the publisher, because they had wanted me to write a book about love magic. They're like, it's going to sell so much. It's going to be, at Urban Outfitters. I don't know why this is what their agenda of what my hallmark of fame would be. Yeah, I'll be in Urban Outfitters. We never got in Urban Outfitters, and it didn't sell very well, my love magic book. And I think because basically what I said in the love magic book is, it's not all about trapping somebody or tying them up or making this person love you. It's about loving yourself and drawing the right love for you to you, right? Like, and people ain't trying to hear that. They want what they want
now.
Yeah, and they want who they want. It doesn't matter if that's a bad person. It doesn't matter if that's a sick person. It doesn't matter if any of those things. They just want what they want, right? So when that didn't sell really well, they said, "What do you want to write?" And I said, I'll just be honest with you, because that's how I feel today. They said, I said, I want to write a book about Marie Laveau. They're like, no. And then they hired somebody else to write a book about Marie Laveau a month later. And I said, okay, so how about this book, Orisha's Goddesses and Voodoo Queens, which has a lot of stuff. Voodoo Queens has a lot of stuff about Marie Laveau in there. So that was the book that I kind of always wanted to write about the divine feminine in the African pantheon, because there's so much of what, I mean, I grew up as a kid in school learning like Greek mythology and Roman mythology about Athena and Minerva and all of these other, and I think that's great. But like, you ask most people to name 5 African, deities, what, like, and that just seems like there's a great disparity there. So I always wanted to write this book about the African divine feminine. Birthplace of civilization, Africa, right? Like we've got a lot of divine feminine that was suppressed over the years and still is not known. So people say, oh, can I read the book if I'm a white person? I'm like, yes. How many of us Black people had to read about Athena and ancient Greece and all of this stuff? Like, let's equalize the whole thing out there. So that's why I wrote that. Water Magic was pretty much, my editor had come to me and they were doing an elemental series and they wanted me to do the first one in the series. So I thought, well, that's ridiculous because, I have no planets in water. I'm in Aries with a Libra moon and a Libra rising, all fire and air. So I'm just like, how's this going to work? But as I said, the more I looked into it, it made sense. I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, right next to the East River. I'm here in New Orleans, living right next to the Mississippi and the canal, so I've always been next to these really large bodies of water that impacted me a lot. So, and my tarot book, I was reading, that was my most recent book. I've been reading tarot for, I don't even want to say like, decades. And, and I had come up with a system for equating the cards with different recipes or different crystals or different musical notes so people can access the cards however they want to. And I thought that was something I'd never seen anywhere before. And it was all of my books. It's something that you can use even if you're, 10 years old or if you're 100 years old, right? Like a kid's not going to understand what the Hierophant is, but they understand how they feel if they hold a crystal or if they eat this food or if they hear that musical note. So that way it allowed tarot to be accessible to anybody wherever they're at.
I love that. And I'm curious on how women, priestess, are viewed in voodoo. There are certain religions to this day, men are still the powerful ones, the one that hold all the cards. Christianity, they've opened up a little bit. Catholic, they're barely opening up. I know Wiccan, they're very much, the women, their influence in Wiccan. How is voodoo when it comes to, it seems like they would be very open to the femininity of the Wiccan, or not Wiccan, voodoo priestess.
Yeah, they are. And I think it's just sort of a consequence of history. Technically, you have a priest and a priestess or a mambo or a hungan. So you have both of those figures there to lead the ceremony. Right. But we've got this phenomena of voodoo queens. And I think that's because if you look at enslaved people, very often you had the older Black women in the community taking care of the children, teaching the children, and telling them the stories. So because these older Black women were the keepers of knowledge, they ended up with that kind of spiritual power, and that sort of carried over into the tradition.
Wow. Yeah, I think, just you, like people like you and some people you've mentioned are great examples of women that are powerful and you can tell your energy's amazing but you have the strength to really kind of break down walls, men and women. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
I think it also comes from the religion in general. As I said, I spent last summer in Benin, and, they've got the Amazon warrior women, the Woman King, right? That movie was based on that. And so you've got, again, inherent in the tradition and this history, or her story, of these powerful women that really didn't answer to men, that really were, originally I think they were lion hunters or something for the community. And then eventually they got co-opted to work for the government and things like that. But they really were this kind of protectors of society. And they would file their teeth like knives, and they would just, all of these things that they did were just so fierce and intense and powerful that I think, again, that carried over too, right? Like if the religion came from this place that's used to having these strong females, then it's going to carry over in the diaspora to all the places that the religion landed. I'm thinking about Obeah in Jamaica. Very often the main figure they talk about is Queen Nanny, and she was a hero of the Maroons. And it said when she was fighting, all the evil colonizers and everything like that, there was a sacred well, and there was a battle at the sacred well where she was, and she shot bullets out of her behind. And I think that is just like, damn, right? Like,
right. Well, that got my attention, so I definitely.
I mean, sure, I'll join a religion where I can shoot bullets out of my behind if I'm being colonized. Yeah,
I love that. I mean, I've shot some other things, but definitely not bullets.
Yeah. I'm like, that's fantastic, right? Like, so she's legendary. She's the only woman on Jamaican money, so
what's her name again?
Queen Nanny.
Queen Nanny. I love that. Okay, well, I'll have to look her up and
it's fascinating.
Maybe do a story on her.
Yeah.
Well, before I'm going to ask this question, then I want to go over some myths of the voodoo, but You've noted on your website and in other areas that the importance of correct technique and lineage and magic and ritual. For example, you warned a case of a person throwing jewelry into a river without guidance. What's the biggest misunderstanding you've encountered, and what advice do you give to avoid it? And then I want to get into the myths of voodoo that are not true. So let's start with the first one.
Okay. I mean, I think there's a lot. That story definitely comes to mind, and this person is a best-selling author, and they just keep it up with their bad ideas. I don't know how they get away with it. But there's a lot of things I found like that. I had another person that decided they were going to leave an offering for one divinity. And the different divinities, they don't like each other. They have a lot of human characteristics. So there's certain ones we don't leave offerings at the same time or do ceremony at the same time. And this person had done an offering for one that in the place of where the hated, person was. So I was like, well, that's a horrible idea, right? Like, just because, again, they were going without guidance. They didn't have direction. They were making it up. Like, that, none of that is a good idea in the tradition, because like anything, it can be dangerous. I always use him as a bad example. I have a godson, and he was doing a blessing as part of an initiation for his god sister. And he gets the blessing stuff already. And he's like, makes up this stuff to, rub on her skin. And it's full of hot peppers. Oh. Now, any witch would know that, yes, hot peppers is good for protection. But you don't, he basically made like pepper spray and rubbed it on her skin. And she's running around screaming, ah! And I was like, yes, they're for protection. And you can eat them, but do not put it on your skin. That's not going to work.
Oh, my God. That's funny.
So, yeah, I'm still making fun of him for that. I mean, she's fine.
I would too.
He's fine. I just saw him. He's fine. She's fine. We're all good.
Yeah.
Neither of them are ever going to do anything like that again. Right.
They'll be like, Aunt Lilith, could you?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us some other myths, because again, when people think of voodoo, they may think of it in negative terms. Can you give us some myths that are not true?
There's kind of people that are doing something like voodoo dolls today, but traditionally that's not attached to the religion at all.
Really?
It's more of a tourist thing. Yes.
I've always I thought that was part of voodoo.
No. What you get in Nigeria among the Yoruba people, they have the highest incidence of twins in the world. So what they will do is, if you're a twin and one of the twins dies, they'll make a doll for that twin, and that twin will be like, okay, the birthday party, the doll sits in a chair at the table. Holidays, the doll is there. So it's like, and the other twin carries the doll and cares for the doll. So it's like a physical representation of what you've lost. It's not this kind of mad Chucky kind of thing. It's not that at all. It's really just a remembrance and a way for the family to have that memory and that energy of the person that they miss so dearly still there with them in some way, shape, or form, right? So that's a thing. But no, dolls, it comes from Celtic magic, puppets, doing that kind of sympathetic magic where, I'm going to act something on somebody by doing it on the doll as opposed to doing it to them. But no, that's not an African at all, even though you buy voodoo dolls in the airport. It's one of my pet peeves because it really has nothing to do with the tradition. So that's a big one. I think that it's highly sexualized. That's another thing. There's actually a whole bunch of taboos about, sex in the tradition. Sex is supposed to be kept completely separate from the tradition. Even if you have like a sacred space or a shrine or an altar that, you can't have any sexual activity in front of it. People even build special cabinets or a special room in their house to keep their sacred items in. So no sexual activity occurs anywhere near it. I usually say to people, it's like, if you had your grandmother come over, would you do that in front of her? No, you wouldn't. So like, you just keep that separate from them. And there's things that you have to do to even cleanse. Not big things, but like you have to take a shower or something if you had that kind of intimate encounter before you go do your spiritual stuff.
What about chickens? Because that's another one I've seen a lot of in movies, and where they use chickens a lot. How do chickens play a part? Like, is this like a ritual or a sacrifice, or is it even tied with voodoo?
In Haitian Voodoo and Santo or Santeria, very often people will have animal sacrifice. Chicken's probably the animal most commonly sacrificed that people are familiar with. I think just because of the ease, it's just easier to get chickens. And when you figure out what animals are supposed to be sacrificed, usually there's a reading, and you're not going to ask the first thing, oh, should I go get this, should I get an emu? You're not going to ask that because it's going to be hard to get an emu. Your first question is going to be, can I use a chicken? Yeah. And very often it'll say yes, because that's the thing that's easiest. I think that there's a lot of, I get people that are, wearing leather shoes yelling at me about animal sacrifice. And I'm like, well, it's okay to have an animal for your shoe, but it's not okay for you to have it for ritual. And the question I ask people is, if you knew that the medicine to cure your loved one, your spouse, your child of this deadly disease was a chicken gizzard, and you had to kill a chicken for it, everybody would be like, yes, give them the medicine. This will heal them. But when it's for spiritual reasons, people have like, oh, no, we can't do that. And that for me seems like they're just not, they think it's fake, or they don't think it's real, So very often when people use animal sacrifice, it is to heal somebody from some huge problem or illness or something like that. And if it's just done as regular as part of a ceremony, the meat is almost always eaten, or it's...
I was going to ask that because...
Yeah, or it's cooked up and given to, a homeless shelter or a food bank or something like that. Very often, that's what happens after ceremony. So you'll be going through, I've been at Santo ceremonies where you're there for like 10 hours doing the things. And then after it's all done, you're cleaning up, and then you've got to cook the chicken, and then you got to bring the chicken over to the homeless people. And my gosh. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, that'd be two birds with one stone, pun intended. So we'll take that.
Yeah. No, totally. No, it's just used because that's the spiritual medicine that's needed, And it's kind of like a battle of, this is what I was taught in the very beginning. It's a battle of wills between you and the animal. So if you're going to take that animal's life, you have to be willing to have your life taken instead. So priests and priestesses are notorious for just dropping dead in the middle of a ceremony. So
Really?
that to me was always the kind of footnote for that. Like, okay, you're walking in here and, in order to do this ceremony to save your community or to save, somebody's
Wow.
life, you're willing to give your own in that situation.
I don't know. I don't know if I'd be ready for that. I'd be ready.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
But
It's a lot.
I give kudos for people that do that. Just a couple more questions. So we talked about some of the myths. How do people use voodoo to enhance their lives? What can they do to enhance their lives with voodoo, even if they don't want to practice on a daily basis?
I mean, I tell everybody to get in touch with your ancestors. I had a client come for a reading and his child was sick. And I said, well, your ancestors understand a sick child, right? Like your grandparents understand a sick child.
Right.
Anybody who has kids understands a sick child. And I said to him, what do you have of your grandfather's? And he said, I have my grandpa's spatula. I use it every Saturday morning to make pancakes. And I said, okay, we'll take that spatula, put it on your ancestor altar, light a candle, explain what you're going through, explain that, you have a kid that's really sick in the NICU and that you want their help and their guidance as to whatever's best in this situation, because sometimes, especially in those things, you feel so powerless, right? Like, so turning to your ancestors, maybe asking them for their assistance in getting the right doctor or getting the right treatment or getting the right diagnosis literally can mean life and death. So I think that giving somebody something to do to connect with their ancestors and a potential helpful voice in that situation is invaluable. So
actually, I have so you can use any object. So I have a diary from my great grandmother. I have
nice.
I have a picture of my great grandmother. I've had it's like an elephant with ivory from my great grandmother.
Nice.
So can you use any objects to connect with your ancestors?
Sure.
Huh.
I mean, like I said, it's better if you have something that they actually touched. But yeah, all those things you mentioned would be absolutely wonderful, and what I do is I keep them on the ancestor altar. It's Halloween, Samhain time, right?
Yeah.
I keep them on the ancestor altar all year. I'll do special offerings, cook food for them for, Halloween time and stuff like that. But then it becomes like a spiritual bank. So then when you do need them and you go to them, oh my gosh, I'm having this issue, right? Like, can you please help give me guidance and knowledge around this in order to improve the situation? You've already put in the time and energy and effort and strengthen that bond between the two of you. And it'll be easier to connect to them when you absolutely do need them.
That's good to know. People take note. So, people that have passed down from generation to generation, you can use that. Speaking of Halloween, how does voodoo embrace Halloween? And what is there any particular practices or rituals that they do this time of year?
Yeah, Haitian Voodoo has huge ceremonies this time of year for the ancestors. They're called Fête Guédé, Fête meaning party, and Guédé being the spirits of the unknown dead. So everybody who died and isn't getting remembered, everybody who died and doesn't have somebody putting their spatula or their wallet or their diary on the altar. All the ones that we've forgotten. It's kind of just a collective time to honor them. And it's a big party to honor them because they can get really raunchy. They like to curse. They like to smoke. They like to drink. So what they do in Haitian Vodou communities at this time is have huge Fête Guédé parties. And people love to join in the parties. My friend Reverence Priestess runs a huge Fête Guédé party coming up in New York City. There's dance classes where you can learn the dances for the Guédé, which are really kind of wild and intense. There's one of them that's like a spider dance because obviously insects and spiders are associated with the dead, right? Because you're in the ground and you've got insects and spiders and all this stuff crawling on you. So they come together. So there's a fantastic spider dance where your hands are like spider hands and you're just sort of reaching different stuff from out the universe and pulling it towards yourself. So if anybody has a chance to take a Guédé dance workshop, I highly recommend it. So yeah, that's two things that people do: big parties, big dances, drinking, hooping and hollering, the whole thing.
I'm sure people just said there's booze and dancing. I'm there.
Yeah. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
I bet. Well, okay. we got to get out of here, but I know voodoo is being rediscovered by younger generations. And like I tell people with ghost hunting, with anything Bigfoot, you need to prepare yourself to respect and to go into a situation or a home or a place and even a religion with knowledge. Can you kind of give us just a quick rundown of how can somebody begin to discover voodoo and doing it respectfully?
Yeah, I would try and seek out a teacher. I would read what you can. Obviously, my books are helpful. I've got a book called Voodoo and African Traditional Religion that sort of breaks down the differences between this is how they do it in Haitian Vodou, this is how they do it in Cuban Lukumi, this is how they do it back in Africa, in Nigeria or Benin. So people can understand the different paths that it took, because each place it landed, you've got the indigenous people there that also blended with it, and
Right.
Appreciation, not appropriation, was happening in the two cultures. So that will help them understand it. And then, find a teacher, get a reading, start with getting a reading, start with talking to other people, the other students from this person. Somebody asked me, what's it okay to ask them? I said, you can always ask. They don't have to answer,
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. What's it like being a student of this person, but really trust them, because you're choosing a parent, and you can't just the same way you can't change your parents. You're kind of stuck with these people. So if you are going to take that leap and begin studying with a spiritual family, do what you can to find out, talk to people and just do your research.
Do you take on new students, or?
It's a process. But yes, I do. And again, I usually recommend people get a reading for anything, like, oh, I want to spell for this job. Well, how do you know that's the best job for you? Get a reading. Let's get a reading. We'll see what we need to do to get you the best job. And we'll see if this job you're trying for is the best job. So, I usually ask people to get a reading first. Oh, okay. Is this the best place for you? Maybe you need to stay home. I had one woman, it was like her kids were really young, and traditionally in this religion, when your kids are really young, you don't join the religion, because there's so much time and energy and effort that you have to divert to the religion, that if your kids are little, they need your time and attention. So we say
nice.
that. So it turned out that she was supposed to, just focus on the kids and not focus on initiating or anything.
I love that. That I remember now, the Church of Satan. That's
okay.
And I was really surprised how they're so helpful in the community and raising money for homeless and so many things. And I was like scratching my head, like, what, really?
Yeah.
And they did not indoctrinate people. If you're under 18, they did not allow you to come into. So I appreciate that, because even in Christianity, from time you come out of the womb, they're ready to put you into, if you want to be a Christian, wonderful. But it's just they're pushed into Christianity. So I really appreciate that. Well, Lilith, thank you so much. You're a delight, and like I said, Patty Negri's the one that referred me to you, and anything she says is who's a good person. I'm all in. So, well, people can go to lilithdorsey.com and you can pick up her books there or on Amazon, or I'm sure in bookstores. So any parting words for this Halloween season for people?
I never know what to say to people, so I resort to Bill and Ted. Be excellent to each other, right?
Yep, I honestly say that after every show, and you'll hear me say it in just a second. But thank you so much for being on the show.
That's great. I must be psychic. Thank you, Tony.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed Lilith. She's just a delight, and I hope if you're in New Orleans, you stop in and see her, and I definitely know I will. But every Friday, you have us right here, and Halloween is a week away, and we want to hopefully bring you another episode before Halloween season comes to an end. But the spirits are always there, so we're always going to be here too. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Bye.